In his defense of the suspension of political activities within Mali's territory until further notice, the Malian Prime Minister Choguel Kakala Maiga has said that the decision was made because any political turmoil or change of government at the moment will demoralize soldiers who are fighting against Sahel violent extremist organizations. That, since coming into power in June 2021, Transitional President Colonel Assimi Goita's administration has done a lot to regain the country's territorial integrity, unlike when the country had over 55,000 foreign troops, but still plagued with terrorism, ahead of his ascension to power, and he is seeking to establish a permanent solution to the security and political affairs of Mali, before handing over the country to his successor. However, that any interference of the security and political initiatives that he has undertaken at the moment, in the name of a return of the country to a democratic process, will only lead to an installation of a weak president, and the return of the country to the same volatile position it was in 2019. And without saying much, take a listen at the Prime Minister's explanation of the current situation in the country here. Ladies and gentlemen, current affairs require, every time the government deals with economic issues, inevitably there are political questions that come in the way. Yesterday, all Malians followed the brilliant press conference given by the Minister of State, Minister of Territorial Administration, on the suspension of the activities of political parties and the political activities of associations. There is a kind of big noise around this. Since yesterday, all the networks have been flooded. There are Malians who understood, and others who do not understand, but all Malians need explanations, either to strengthen those who already believe in their convictions, and to convince those who do not understand the scope of this decision. Because in Mali, we are used to talking about democracy, thinking that under the cover of democracy, everything is possible. But often, it is democracy that is used to kill democracy. And that is why the government necessarily doubled down on vigilance. With the arrival of the transitional government. Since the president was inaugurated on June 7, 2021, in Mali, in reality, whether we like it or not, the political debate has revealed two major trends, as is normal. Moreover, you have those who believe that the priority for Mali is the recovery of its sovereignty, that it is therefore necessary to strengthen security, strengthen reforms, and for the regrouping of sovereignty to become an irreversible process. That's on one side. On the other hand, you have some of the actors who were calling loudly for elections to be held immediately. They were supported by the international community and naturally by ECOWAS too. The rest you know. The first group designed a three-step strategy before going to the elections. The first strategy consists of designing the approach needed to regain the sovereignty of our country. Since then, there were differences which have persisted. It is important that Malians understand this. Then we moved on to the implementation of the policy of recovering our sovereignty. I usually explain to men that in Mali, there was a time when parts of our territory were closed to our army, where our army couldn't even afford goggles, simple night vision goggles. So it was necessary to implement a strategy to recover this sovereignty. We had 50,000 foreign forces on our territory, but terrorism was only gaining ground. This led us to the conclusion and that these forces were not necessarily there for peace. There is even an African president who dedicated himself afterwards and said in 2019 that he does not understand that the number of foreign armed forces and Malians combined was 50,000 in 2019. But terrorism went from the far north of Mali, took 80% of the territory, and better or much worse it was going just to the neighboring countries, even to the Gulf area. Now, there was MINUSMA, Barkhane, G5, Sahel Takuba and UTM, and Cap Sahel, but it still didn't cease. So obviously we had to question the meaning of their presence. Mali has drawn the consequences, and we have recovered the implementation of the recovery process, consisting first of separating itself from these different forces, to give chance and means to our army, so that it is the sole master of our territory, and Mali has regained territorial integrity and sovereignty over the entire national territory. That's the implementation. Now, the next step is the consolidation of this process. There too, the same debates reappeared. That, as long as we were in the first phase, there were debates whether or not we should reinforce the army. When we took Kidal, everyone was silent. Before that, I recalled that when there were the barbaric attacks on the Timbuktu boat, ECOWAS met and did not even speak. At the Security Council level, we could not even adopt a letter of condolences to the President of Mali. So that means that the human lives of Malians, for some, are not worth much. And so, the government decided that the stabilization phase after the implementation, after the development of the strategy and its implementation of recovery of the integrity of our country and sovereignty, that the end of stabilization must reach a point of no return, to a sufficiently stable point, to be able to organize elections as soon as Mali has regained the integrity of its territory and its sovereignty. The president of the transition immediately drew the political, historical and strategic conclusions, which consist of saying that it is not enough to conquer territories by force. You need management. The president set up the Inter-Malian Dialogue Committee. So the results of the work of this committee plus the achievement of the level of stabilization of the country's sovereignty are the sine qua non conditions for setting the date of an election. And so, while these two processes are underway, Malians must understand that the existence of our nation must lead us to help these two processes come to an end. You know, in each country, we take reality into account when deciding. Those who listen to the United States, there are debates today, but when you listen to Trump, he tells you that the American economy is a disaster. When you listen to the president in power, he tells you that the economy is not, and has never been better than this year, so the citizens have all the versions to analyze and decide. Well, Mali is the same thing. For those who are determined to ensure that the process of recovering the sovereignty of Mali reaches a point of no return before going to anything. That the Inter-Malian Dialogue submits its conclusions to the head of state. Because it is a sort of foundation, and it is the combination of these two solutions which will allow the government to decide when it should go to elections. That's part of the Malians. But there are others who from the start said, let's have elections. The recovery of sovereignty was not their problem. We regained sovereignty. Now they say we have to go to elections. Can you imagine the soldiers fighting on the ground, if there is political turmoil to demobilize them? We experienced this in Mali. The reality is that we are learning lessons from our country's recent history. In 2012, you remember very well, while the soldiers were dying on the ground, there were politicians holding meetings to tell the soldiers to stop fighting, and that contributed to the demoralization of our soldiers. It's no secret that there were demonstrations in the cities while others were killing themselves. Secondly, today, we know that there is a strategy of encircling the AES countries. Everything that is done against us we left to them, and we have the bet. You see, the elongation of the attacks in Menaka, Kale, Sikasso, are the bloody attempt to disperse our efforts. Then there are the economic questions that follow. So, in our country, as long as we have not reached such a strong level of stabilization, the process of recovering the integrity of our territories and the sovereignty has not reached the weight of our return. And there are enemies of Mali who are counting on that, and they are indeed counting on the internal political situation in Mali to bring us into a sort of democratic angelism in the name of democracy, so that we can organize ourselves and ask the soldiers to pick up pace, to hold elections, and bring a weak president, whom they will have pressure. However, the current team that is there works in the interest of the majority of Malians. So the appeal that I wanted to make to all the forces supporting the transition, it is to understand that this approach is of public order. It is for the security of our country, that is, so that the achievements registered can reach a point of no return. It's not for anything else. As the head of the transitional government, I told the ambassadors here that everyone understands very clearly that those who lead Mali today have an intellectual coefficient well above the least of what they think. No one is going to deceive us. No one is going to come under angelic speeches to destabilize our country. We already know this story. There are even actors who specialize in it. We don't need to name them. Malians, we understand them, we know them. When there were attacks in the north, soldiers were dying. There were meetings at Independence Square to ask the soldiers to drop out. Everyone remembers how mothers were encouraged to call their children to tell them that you shouldn't fight, that it's not worth it. But those who do this are under the guise of democracy. It's the same thing. So I would like Malians to understand very well. It is not an initiative of the Minister of State who stood up to suspend these activities. It is the deep awareness of the entire management team regarding its historic mission to lead the Malian people to the right port, that no noise comes to destabilize us, no demagogic and angelic speech wants to deceive us so that we get the wrong adversaries of the time and exactly and above all the mission set for us. I would like everyone to understand that this is not against anyone. The proof is that everyone is hit by the same boat. We did not choose to leave the former close to the transitional government, and others know it is all Malians. So it is a general measure, as the minister said, for a question of public order. I really want this to be very clear to everyone.